Hey guys, welcome back. This is the Jedi Council, Young Jedi CCG YouTube channel, back with a fun video here for you today. So today we have a very iconic deck. This is the Sandage Says I Win deck, which was basically featured, I can't remember the tournament, if it was 2001 DecipherCon or what it was, but basically the first major tournament after Boon to Eve Podrace came out. Some people from Colorado, I think, came up with this deck. William Deninga and Kelly, some other person. But either way, this was released right after this deck came out right after Boon to Eve, and it essentially exploited the pod racing mechanic. So I don't know if the designers of YJ just assumed that pod racing was going to kind of be a fun thing you do on the side, but basically this is an all-in pod racing deck. It doesn't try to win battles, it doesn't try to win planets and control the game. Sole purpose of this deck is to stay alive to win the pod race. And you'll see that under the original rules, that was actually very easy to do, and in fact, pretty much impossible not to do with this particular build. So this did lead to an errata to the card Jira, as well as a change to the pod racing rules. So I'm going to cover the deck, though, and we'll just go through and explain the tech of it. If you haven't watched our previous video just to learn about what pod racing is and how it works, we do have a brief tutorial video, part 1, just on explaining pod racing, so I don't have to explain that as part of this video. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to look at is we're just going to do our dot layout as we usually do. For our red dot, we are featuring, a whopping 10 copies of Jira. And yes, these are all foil. You guys know me. So basically, Jira the Pally vendor, when she deploys, you may deploy an Anakin's friend from your draw deck. So you'll see how ridiculously strong that was in this era of the game. The other, obviously, major flaw with this is Jira was made as a stackable character, like most unique characters, meaning you could have as many of her down as you want. So a popular play in this era would literally, I'll just kind of show you a sequence here of how this could work. So basically, you could have one Jira in your hand. You'd play that Jira, pull Wald, who is non-stackable, but either way, play the Wald, play Wald to take a character into hand, which is another Jira, play that Jira, take like another friend like Ami, let's say, and then she'd take a starship. So if you just see what I just did there, that populated out of just this one card in my hand. And so that's just to show you how absurd Jira was at this era of the game when she was a stackable character. And of course, that final character, we can get whatever we want. We can get Kitzer for a weapon, or Seek for a battle card, whatever's needed. So basically just very absurd. And then as you can see, by me being able to populate 4 characters with that one character in my hand, then I'm able to make it so that the dark side simply cannot kick me off of a planet because I'm putting too many characters down. And so, take the example even more, like let's just say I had 2 Jiras in my hand. I can literally go with the first Jira, exactly what I showed you, Jira Wald, Jira Ami, and then with the second Jira, I can get another friend. So literally that would show 6 characters off of just 2 Jiras. So that's the name of the game. And then, of course, I'd end up with a battle card and a starship also. So yeah, I think that's kind of demonstrating for you guys how absurd Jira is. So we are going to give that laid out there for our red dot. The full 10 Jiras, you'll notice this is way better than any enhanced card you could possibly play. So we are playing the full 10, no enhanced characters at all. So red dot, pretty self-explanatory. Blue dot, I would say, is our weakest dot. However, we are playing, in particular, one card for its stats, and that is the Bravo Pilot. Obviously, this is just a crap card. This could be anything as long as it has these stats. But basically, the 4 Destiny is going to be important for pod racing because that is our handling number, meaning that's our wild card for pod racing. And then just statistically, this is just a small character, good deploy power damage ratio, and it's non-unique. So we do play a full 9 of this, even though, like I said, it's basically a junk card that is just a non-unique character that has the right handling number. So there's not too much else I want to say about that. Not critical. Well, critical for what it does, but not one of the critical components of the deck. And then we do run 1 enhanced R2-D2 in that dot. Then moving on to the green dot, probably our most critical. Reason I say that is it does have all of our friends in it, so you have the full standard friend package that you'll see. We're running 2 copies of Walled. Obviously, that's to get any character. This guy's the best card in the game, in my opinion. Once Jira has been errata, Jira's the best card pre-errata. But Walled just gets you any character, including other friends, such as Kitzer, who gets you any weapon. In most decks that actually try to fight, obviously Kitzer is very good because he gets your main character their weapon, and weapons are critical in Young Jedi. In this deck, he's just getting your pod racer, which is important, but you probably naturally have that already. So I would maybe consider, again, I'm not trying to second guess this deck, but I'd maybe consider to go down to 1 Kitzer in this deck. And then critical, again, for any deck is 2 copies of Ami, because she gets your starship. So she's absolutely a fantastic card, and she's a staple of any unique character deck because she just calls up your starship so that you can evacuate your main character. And then we do have 1 Seek. Like I said, I could see going up to a 2nd Seek and going down to 1 Kitzer. Seek is actually critical for just calling up cards because you'll see with your battle card dot, when we get to that, you have a very good variety of destiny numbers in your battle card dot, which is literally all that it's there for, is to call up with Seek or at the start of a planet when you take an effect into hand, just to take the proper destiny number. That's literally what your battle cards in this deck are for. Because like I said, you're not trying to win battles here. In fact, you prefer to lose battles with these guys because they're non-stackable. So if you needed to get a 2nd Walled onto the table, or 2nd Kitzer, 2nd Ami, you prefer for it to die, actually. And then the last part of the green dot, why I say is critical, is your pod racer, the namesake of the deck, Juan Sandage. As I said, this is the Juan Sandage Says I Win deck. He's just in here solely to be Juan Sandage, and we've got 3 copies of him. And what he does is he handles for a 4. So since he's card number 14, 4 is his handling number, meaning 4s are wild for when we're pod racing. And so just 3 copies of that, of course, just substantially increases our chance of getting that in our opening hand, or if we have to, on our 2nd draw. So that is our green dot. Then moving on to our weapons is about as boring as it gets. We have Juan Sandage's Pod Racer. Now, the thing that's broken about this is the pod is a 4 destiny, and Juan Sandage's handling number is a 4 destiny, meaning that all these extra pods that you get in your hand, you can race them as wild cards so they never clog up your hand. But you can play a 10 of these, which we do, full 10, and virtually ensure that you get it in your opening hand. I don't know the stats on that, of course, but you've got 13 hits because the pod calls up Juan or Juan calls up the pod per the Boon to Eve pod race objective text. So you have 13 hits in your opening hand out of 60, and you draw 6. That being said, if you don't hit, you simply do a full hand discard on your first your first draw step, and then you draw 6 again next time. And I would think it's virtually impossible out of 12 cards to not hit any of those 13 hits out of 60. So that's Juan Sandage's pod, literally down there just to get that as quickly as possible to the Boon to Eve pod race, ideally on turn 1, turn 2 at the latest. So we do have our full 10 of those. So again, no enhanced cards. Those are all wild cards for racing, and it, as I said, just make sure you immediately start the race on turn 1. I don't believe this was the intent of the designers, was that you'd be able to have that sort of guarantee by just running 10 pod racers. Again, weapons in Young Jedi are historically the most important slot, so I think they've probably figured you wouldn't want to give up that slot. But then, you know, these people came up with an all pod racing deck that says, I don't even care about fighting, just give me 10 pod racers. So then, yeah, moving on to the battle card slot. And like I said, the key with the battle cards here is we're running a 3-3-3 split of Usagai's Bombadil, the Gunga City, and the Wisdom of the Council. So why are we doing that? Like I said, none of these battle cards are functional for us. Other than, I suppose, in theory, you could use a guy's Bombad 2 Jiras together. You'd never do that, but just giving you a fun idea. But the point is, the battle cards, what they're actually in there for is purely for their destiny numbers. You'll see we have 1s. 1s are very hard to get, and you want to have them for pod racing. And so the really awesome thing with this is you go to the first planet, and because you get to call up a battle card every time a planet is chosen, you call up the number 1 every time, unless you already have this in your hand. Because basically that will guarantee that you get to race it and just put it straight down to your pile as a 1 destiny, and you don't have to use a wild. So we do have 3 copies of that to be able to do that. You have 3 laps in the race, so if you needed to, on the second planet, get this again, you'd be able to do that. As I said, if you already have that in hand, a great one to select is the number 3 with the Gunga City. We've got 3 copies of that. And so if I already have a Bombad in my hand and a next planet comes up to choose, well, then I can choose 3 as an effect so that I can have that for the race. Because again, there's no other 1s in the deck, no other 3s in the deck other than these 3 cards. But then you can just pull them with planets when you need them, and or, as I said, pull them with Seek when you need them. So that is the tech there. And then lastly, we run 3 copies of Wisdom of the Council. Again, you'll note there that's just the number 4, and the number 4 is your wild number. So that's why we're running that, because again, can race that as anything. Should also say, of course, you can race these as 5s too. If you don't want to use a wild, all of these count as 5s by using their effect side. So you can do it that way too. But most critically, you're typically looking for the battle card number, but you can race it as either one. So yeah, so that's hopefully some good tech for you there. I'm just going to row these out, even though they're not going to display very nicely in a, you know, these are a graphic design nightmare in my opinion, about just printing 2 tiny cards on a half card like this. It also just makes it so obvious that you are power creeping and totally obsoleting the old cards, because two cards which you get to choose are always going to be strictly better than either one of those cards that are on the half and half. But that's, you know, the direction the game was going with Reflections at that point. So then the very last dot here, and there's an R2-D2 in there too, because we just did the 3-3-3 split. 10th card is R2-D2. Then our location and starship slot is pretty boring, pretty standard. We do have 3 Naboo starfighters. Again, there's not a ton of 6s in this deck, really, if you look around, so we're almost probably racing those. But they're nice, high destiny, and we do run 1 Bravo fighter, again, just because that's a good card. But this is pretty similar to what you'll see for any purple dots, sorry, blanked on that, purple dot starship lineup. And then you do see 2 Amidala's starships. I'd say I typically run 3, but again, I'm not actually caring about winning and fighting, so I can see why they went down to 2 here. But that's the other change I could see very easily happening, is going up to a 3rd one of these, because again, there's no 2s in the deck besides this. So I could see you saying, I'm going to play 3 Amidala's starship, and then I'm going to cut one of these Naboo starfighters here. That would be a very viable alternative. But yeah, that's basically the only suggestions I have is on Kitzer and the starship, just from having played this before. And then you've got your locations, pretty standard. You've got Mos Espa, Capital City, and the Gungan Swamp. I don't think anything too much to say there. One thing to note, and this is covered in the pod racing video, you cannot race these, even though they are your wild number, because you can't race locations. So locations are never allowed to be put in your pod racing pile. And then lastly, speaking of pod racing, of course, we have the Boonta Eve Classic. Never leave home without it. Like I said, this is what allows you to play your pod racer from your deck, or your pod racer from your deck when you play Juan, or Juan from your deck when you play your pod racer. And then it just gives you the abbreviated version of the pod racing rules here about placing thrust tokens, playing lap cards, drawing cards to refuel. So like I said, we do have the previous video covering the mechanics of how that works. And then our next video is actually going to be a play test of this deck, where I'm going to try to actually on camera show you how this pod racing works. That'll be a bit of a challenge to try to document while I play, but I'll try to do that for you guys so that you can see how absurd this literally plays out. Hopefully, though, after you've watched this video, you'll have a better understanding of what goes on when I do that actual gameplay video. Because yeah, it's definitely good to understand and know what the deck is and how it works, because then that'll give you a better idea of what I'm going to be doing when I actually do play it out. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. This is the deck that broke YJ, or you could just say that Boonta Eve Pod Race broke YJ. But like I said, I love Jira as a card. She's way overpowered though, and further cemented the fact that the light side has way better cards that the dark side doesn't. They never made a dark side Jira, but definitely for the good of the game, having her go down to a non-stackable card is very reasonable. I still usually run like 5 of her in my decks, even when she's non-stackable. She's that good. And then obviously the pod racing is just total nonsense. We shouldn't be playing 10 pod racers in our weapon dot. We shouldn't be not trying to win battles at all and be playing 10 Bravo pilots just so we can race. This deck is hot garbage, as you can tell, but it's a very elegant abuse of the pod racing rules to just say, hey, I'm going to take this to the most extreme, and I'm just going to lay out pukes on every planet, and I'm going to do that long enough to win the pod race. And it's very successful at doing that. So like I said, I'll give you guys a video next time showing how that works and showing the power of this deck. And when you win a pod race in Young Jedi, just very quick, your opponent places their deck in their discard pile. That is the effect. It of course doesn't say that on here, but that is the rule of the game, that when you win a pod race, your opponent loses their whole deck. It would have been interesting, I think, if they would have made it like lose 10 cards or something like that, so that it wasn't just that you automatically lost, and then it maybe could have been more of a side diversion. But the whole you automatically win the entire game is what really allowed a deck like this to exploit the rule and say, okay, well, if I just win the game by pod racing, then I don't need to actually try to win the game any other ways. As opposed to like the Dark Side Watto deck. It's a very good fighting deck, and it pod races. It can win either way. This, as you can tell, this ain't winning anyway except by pod racing. So thanks, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for that playthrough.